Hi, New Life Detroit. I'm Greg, and I'm glad I get to share with you. I wish we could be in person, but if we were in person, you wouldn't get a chance to check out the cool background behind me and my eldest daughter's virtual school space. But I do wish we could be together in person because we find ourselves in like uncertain times, right? I mean, with the church closing, it is uncertain. And, I was asked to share and as we bring New Life Detroit to an end, how does a Jesus follower respond when things end? Some endings in our life can be satisfying, like a good book that just kind of wraps everything up at the end, satisfying. And some aren't satisfying at all, like a church closing. And I'm not the biggest fan of endings. An example would be when the last Harry Potter book came out. I didn't pick it up for months because I wasn't ready to say goodbye to my friends. And then when I did pick it up, one of my friends dies early on. And so I set it back down again because I wasn't ready to say goodbye to my friends. Endings, they can be hard. And as I've considered this topic, how I've paid attention to, well, how am I responding? And so I'm going to share just a couple of those with you. One thing I've been doing, and it seems to happen naturally, is I've been feeling stuff, like all sorts of stuff. And when things come to an end, we can have wide sweeping emotions. We can feel disillusioned and hurt, sad, but happy at the same time, maybe a little nostalgic, but then confused, worried, relief, maybe afraid, anxious, reminiscent, maybe some gratitude, and then grief mixed in, maybe angry. We can feel all sorts of emotions, right? So what do we do with these sometimes competing emotions? We could ignore them, but they'll have to be dealt with at some point. We could just choose to focus on the good ones, the happy ones. But at some point, those negative emotions are going to poke their heads up. We could just choose to be bitter, but bitterness will just creep into every corner of your life. But we could do that. We could take them to Jesus, which kind of feels at this moment like a churchy answer, but this is church. And I think I can tell you that Jesus can handle all the emotions that you can bring to him. He can handle it. I know this because I've experienced it. I've seen it in friends' lives, and I see it in the Bible. One of the places I see it is in Matthew chapter 14, where Jesus' friends, they experience an emotion that's very familiar to me. They had just Jesus had just fed a ton of people with a very little bit of food. So after that, he goes to rest and pray, and he sends his followers, his friends, out to sea. And this is a familiar setting for them because a lot of them are fishermen. But it is in this familiar setting that a strong storm kicks up and they get afraid. And it must have been a huge storm because they were used to storms as fishermen. And it's in the midst of this fear that they see a figure walking to them on the water. And now they're even more afraid. And as Jesus draws near, he sees their fear, like he sees it. And he doesn't scold them for being afraid. He doesn't ignore their fear. He just meets it right where they're at, and he offers peace. Jesus can handle our emotions. He did it in the past, and he'll do it for you too now. Another thing that I've been trying to do in response to New Life Detroit coming to an end is to look for hope. I think it's natural for us to either look for hope or sit in hopelessness, and we can go back and forth. I know I do. But I can look for hope because things ending is not really a foreign thing in our world. An example, trees. They grow, they get leaves, they get pretty, then they fall to the ground and everything looks dead. But I can have hope that those trees that are barren will once again get leaves because I've seen it happen. Spring is coming. There is hope. And in that same story in Matthew, right after Jesus tells them that they don't need to be afraid, because whom they thought was a ghost walking on the water, which was a fine guess in my mind, that water walker proved himself to be Jesus. And one of Jesus' friends, Peter, he exhibits great hope that it is in fact Jesus, because he joins Jesus on the water, like walking on the water too. And that's real hope. Because if it's not Jesus, Peter drowns. Hope. It's a hard one, and I have to be honest here. I would not have done what Peter did. I'd have stayed in the boat. And you may say, well, Peter could do that because he had just seen Jesus do this huge miraculous thing in feeding all those people. But I've seen God do great things. I think I've seen him do some miraculous things. And if you look at your life and what your experience have been, I think you could find that God did great things in and around you too. And it's in that, having seen and witnessed God do great things, that gives me space to hope. It gives me space to hope for something new after New Life Detroit comes to an end. Hope. It's intermingled with trust for me, because trusting is hard, and it's the final thing I'm going to share about today. I mean, who likes to trust? I know I find it very difficult because no one's going to look out for me better than me. At least that's what I think. Soon after Peter steps out of that boat, Peter looks around and he sees all this chaos around him. And he takes what was courage and then that great hope, and he exchanges it once again for the fear that was there before. His trust in Jesus wavers as he moves his eyes from Jesus to the storm. And again, I wouldn't have been out there in the first place, so I have no judgment for Peter here. As Peter begins to sink, he cries out to Jesus for help. And Jesus, he reaches out his hand and he rescues Peter. And in that moment, trust was rebuilt because Peter had no choice. And at times I found myself in that position. It is sinking, drowning, and trusting Jesus is not happening. And in that, Jesus reaches down to me. He meets me in it. And trust begins to rebuild, because in those spaces, I have no other choice but to trust him. We find ourselves in a position like that now. This local church is closing, and it feels at times like a fierce storm, honestly, to me. And in that, as fear creeps in, I'm reminded to move my eyes from the storm back to Jesus. He can be trusted. And you know how I know this? I know it because he died to pay the penalty for my sins. And he did this before I got all cleaned up. The Bible says, while I was still sinning, that Jesus died for me. So if he did that for me in all my worst parts, he can take me at any stage of my put togetherness. And guess what? With all that dying for sins while the people were still sinning, all that's for you too. And this is the gospel. This is the gospel. We can trust Jesus even in the situation we found ourselves in because we're his. That is the gospel. He'll care for us. You see, this church, New Life Detroit, was not planted to help people learn how to follow New Life Detroit. That was not the plan. The plan was to show people how to follow Jesus. So this local body of God's Big C church may be ending, but Jesus isn't ending. You can follow him. You can take your emotions to him. You can place your hope in him. You can trust in him. You can do it. You're his. New Life Detroit. Oh my goodness. It has been an honor to pastor you. And my hope is that as I've exhibited weakness, it shows you Jesus. If there's been times I exhibited some strength, I hope it showed you Jesus. My final words to you and the final talk that I'll give are these. Love God with everything you got. And love people, especially orphans and widows, with everything you have. Thank you, New Life Detroit. Thank you.